Hi and welcome to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a lovely day today. For the tutorial today, I'd like to share with you a couple of different ways of making your own hook clasps. Now these go by a couple of different names. I usually refer to them as J-hooks or simply hook clasps. Now there's a whole bunch of reasons you might want to make your own. Sometimes you need one and you don't have a ready-made one. Sometimes you're making a handmade chain and you want to finish it off with a handmade clasp. Sometimes you can't find one in the right metal colour, so you'll want to use your own wire to create that. So let's head down to the board and take a look at some options, and then let's make some clasps together. So we have a simple clasp, we have a wrapped clasp, and then we have a doubled hook clasp. So we're going to start with the simple clasp. Now this one definitely works better if you're using a heavier wire. So I have 1.25mm or 16 gauge wire. I'm going to grab in my multi-step bail makers, or you could of course use your little memory wire pliers if you prefer. And it's a very, very basic design. You're just going to be working with the heaviness of the wire, or you can hammer a slightly lighter wire if you prefer, but I would say definitely use a slightly heavier gauge if you possibly can, or even level that up to 1.5mm 14 gauge wire, which is what I've used here. So let's just pop that down. I'm starting with around about 3 inches of wire. I'm going to give that a quick warm through. Now this has already been flush cut on both ends, just needs to be slightly smooth. So I'm going to create a clasp in this form with a very, very easy to open and closable loop just on one end. So that's where we'll start. I'm going to use the smallest edge of my bail making pliers. I'll rotate that all the way around until you have that first part of the form, and then I'm going to grip that form about 1mm before the complete form is created, so that I can pull the wire away at a right angle like so, and then that gives us an opportunity to just close this up, give that a bit of a squish to make it sit neat and tidy, and then we're going to create the rest of the form. Now 3 inches is more than adequate to make a really good sized clasp. So again, just a little bit of warmth into that wire. If you don't have your multi-step bail making pliers, you can of course use wooden mandrel or round forms from around the home. I'm going to use the largest section on my bail makers. I'm going to start by creating a little bit of a roundness at the end there, and then draw the wire back over so that it crosses over itself and you get that perfect pear drop shape. What we're then going to do is use the smallest step on those bail makers, or you could use your round nose pliers if you prefer, and we're just going to rotate that away so you can see that's coming away from the round form, and we want to make the smallest possible round shape on the end here. Now using your round nose pliers is in fact sometimes a little bit better because you can get a much smaller loop. I'm very gently going to prise that apart and just close this up. You'll notice it's not a perfect round, it's more like a slightly open pear drop shape. Give that a squish and then make sure it's nice and flat before bringing that back together. Now you can make this a little bit larger and rounder if you prefer. I'm trying to show you the basics of the design, which is dropping it on the table obviously. We have an open and closable loop into which one end of your chain or bracelet will go, or necklace indeed, like so. And then the other section, you need to ensure that this circular shape or little pear drop shape is not so large that it won't go through the last link of your chain, or you can always add on an extra jump ring if you need to. Now I like to hammer these even if I'm working with a heavier wire, so I'm going to grab my mini block in now and my chasing hammer and just hold that form really tightly closed so that when you hammer around the circular section you support the shape as a whole, and then that wire will gain a new memory of there not being a huge gap just here, because you don't want your necklace or bracelet to come undone. Once you've closed that back up, support across the round form What you may notice is that the hoop or hook at the end has just opened up a bit, so we just make sure that that closes back up. Make sure that that's good and strong before you add it into the end of your bracelet or necklace, and then you are good to go. For the next hook clasp, I'm going to show you two variations of basically the same thing, and it's a wrapped loop hook clasp. So you can add in beads of your choice if you desire, or you can just go for the wrapped metal. Either way, it's basically the same. So let's head back and get that done. For the wrapped loop clasp, you could use 1mm 18 gauge or 1.25mm 16 gauge. I'm demonstrating with that 1mm 18 gauge. I have a length of pre-warmed, pre-flush cut 1mm wire, 18 gauge, and this is around about 5 inches in length. So we're going to actually start at the other end this time around. I'm going to make a very, very teeny tiny loop to go at the outer edge of that hook clasp. Let's give that a quick squish. Push that as close to closed as possible. If you struggle to get this form through the loop in your chain or the other end of your necklace or bracelet, you can support that and very, very gently squish it so you end up with more of an oval shape. That's much easier to achieve in that 1mm or 18 gauge. The next thing we're going to do is give that a quick warm, and then we're going to create the round part of the clasp. I think again I will use the largest one on my bail making pliers. Draw that wire all the way around so that it crosses over. If that's too large, you can rotate those pliers around and make it slightly smaller, whatever makes you happy. Now the difference here is that we're going to use our pliers to generate a flat section at that little loop end part. Just draw that nice and straight. If you want to hammer this section, now is the time to do so. I'm not going to do that, you've seen me hammering today, so you could apply this section to a block and just hammer as far as that loopy part. It does really, really help if you're working in the 1mm gauge to do so. If you wish to add on some beads, now is the time to do so. Obviously they will need to be fitting on your chosen wire. So if you wanted to add the beads, just slide them into position, but they need to not go past that loop section, otherwise it'll interfere with the operation of the hook loop itself. So let's imagine you've put some beads in. I'm not going to show you the same thing twice. Here's one with beads and here's one without. I'm going to show you this variation. So we're going to leave some space for wrapping and create a right angle. We're then going to create a wrapped loop down at the base. So if I just rotate this around, to create that round form, draw the wire up and over. If you want this to add on to the end of a piece of chain, now is the time to slide that piece of chain into position. Either that or you can use a jump ring later on, but I would say the fewer connections you have the better. So if you're using this on chain, just slide the last link of your chain into position now. Make sure that round form is nice and secure, and if you're forming this with the chain in position, you might need a slightly larger loop so that you can support across that round form without disturbing the chain, and then create that nice tightly wrapped segment which will add strength to this clasp. So let's imagine that we have no beads on this one. Well, you don't need to imagine, there are no beads on this one, so you can just fill that gap to your heart's content. If you want beads on your clasp, then you'll need to leave some space for the wrapping as well as the beads. So I'm going to make the last wrap coincide with where that hoop bit is, and we'll take it from there. I'm just going to trim away the end section just now, like so. Get that last little bit of wire out of the way, and then push that just over the top and get it nice and neat and tidy. So you could create variations either with or without beads of that design. For the last clasp on today's tutorial video, I'm going to show you how to make a doubled up variation. Now, I do tend to use 1mm or 18 gauge wire for this project because you do need a little bit of fluidity to get it to sit right and look neat. So this is really a design that I came up with when I didn't have any heavier wire and I wanted a sturdy and substantial clasp. Let's head back down to the board to take a closer look and then let's make this last clasp together. So I've popped some beads into this one because I think it's quite a nice clasp to have beads in. Generally speaking, I wouldn't have a clasp quite this long unless I'd made a necklace that was too short and I wanted to add a little bit of length to that. On the back of the wrist, this clasp is too much, so I would definitely either just use a single small bead or no beads at all. I'm going to show you with a single bead. Let's grab one from the pot. Let's go for red again, always a good colour. So I'm starting with 1mm 18 gauge wire and I have around about 8 or 9 inches to begin with. Let's give that a quick warm through to get us going. Now what we're going to do is start working at the hook end. So probably around about half of the way along, we're going to put the bend in the wire, turn that around on itself. It doesn't need to be perfect, it doesn't really matter if it's exactly half. And what we're going to do is employ a second pair of flat facing pliers to help us close that end section up. So if you hold that little U-bend or hairpin racetrack bend, just grip that with some flat facing pliers quite close to the end. You can then close that up so that you get that nice neat finish. Now you might find if you don't go quite close enough to the end that the wire twists over. It's absolutely fine. You can just straighten that up and then bring the wire back together. Let's put those pliers out of the way. We might need them again in a second. So I quite like to put a little bit of a kick on the end of the wire here. And this is in lieu of that circular or pear drop shape that we had on some of the other clasps. Again, we're going to use those multi-step bail makers. I think I might go for maybe number 4 this time. So let's put those pliers into position and create a nice hook. That's quite an elongated hook. So if you decide that that hook is too long, you can put those pliers back in, open it up and bend that around from the other side and you'll make that a little bit shorter. So what we're going to do now is again put a straight line just opposite that little deviation we made at the tip of that hook design. So what we're going to do now is to wrap around on the hook, the double wrapped hook design. What you need to do, if you've got one wire that's slightly shorter, that's the one we're going to work with. And what we're going to do is cross that over or under the other slightly longer wire, but it needs to be a little distance away from that angle change. So if I just push that over, you'll see what I mean. So we've got that wire kicking out at a funny angle. What we're going to do is just strengthen that pairing just for a second, and then I'm going to pull the angle change up and away at about 45 degrees. So it's not coming out directly at 90 degrees, it's sitting up a little bit. And that is going to enable me to grip just across that angle change, a fraction of a millimetre, just past like so, and push the wire over. What we're looking to do is to create a little bit of a hook around that main line of wire. Once we've done that, we can bring back that second pair of flat facing pliers and just grip across those 2 parallel wires. That's why we needed that little bit of a gap just past the lip section. You're going to need to grip that really firmly as you bring that tail of wire around. And we're going to wrap that a couple of times around what has become the core wire. So I would say probably 2 times is the minimum. I think I've gone for 4 times, which is quite nice. I leave that tail of wire there for a moment. If I add the bead on, I might even make a little bit of an extra detail with that. Just going to leave it there for a moment. What can sometimes happen is that it gets a little bit bent whilst you're doing this, so you just need to refine that ever so slightly, straighten and tighten before you move on to the next section. So let's add in our bead. As I mentioned before, you don't have to have a bead, especially if you're working on a bracelet design. It might take up too much space, but I'm going to pop a bead on anyway. So let's just straighten up that little section. Always take care of your bead. And then we're going to create a wrapped loop at the opposite end. So let's just push that wire away again at 90 degrees. Let's make a small loop. Draw that wire all the way around, and again, if you're making this to go on a chain, necklace or bracelet, now is the time to add that chain into position so that you have as few connections as possible. I'm not going to add any chain in because I can do that differently later. So let's just give that a little bit of a strengthen and draw that wire all the way around. Now ideally, I'd like as many twists of wire on this side of the bead as there are on the other. So if we go for a second and a third twist, give that a little bit of a tidy up and make sure that you're happy with how that's looking. I might take that one over the top, give that a squish and a squeeze, and then you have the option as to whether or not you want to bring these wires around in that Jupiter's moons design. If you wish to add a little bit further to the design, you absolutely can. I'll show you just on one of those sides exactly what I mean. It is entirely optional. If you don't want to do that, you can simply trim the wire away neatly like I'm doing on this side, and then make sure that you tidy up the end of that wire. So I'm just going to gently squish that down and then rotate those pliers around, tidy that up neatly. Again, I will say you don't have to add this detail. I just thought because I had a little excess wire, I might do that. So trying to keep things as straight as possible, we're going to draw the tail of wire around the outside of the bead. It's come from on top of the core, around the outside of the bead to underneath, and then we're going to draw that around and just fill in that last little bit of wrapping. If you didn't like it, you can always take it back and trim it away. As it happens, I think it looks quite nice, so I'm just going to tighten that up as much as I can. Give it a little bit of a squish and a squeeze, and there you have a hook clasp which has got a double strength hook on it. That will still go into most of your chains. Let's just hook it through that loop just there. And you've got a little bit of an embellishment, but as I mentioned before, you could simply trim those wires away if you preferred. I hope that you've enjoyed making a plethora of hook clasps with me today. Don't forget, there really aren't any rules. You can design exactly how you feel. You can add embellishments, you can do less, you can use different wires, have a practice, see what you think, see which ones you like most. And I look forward to seeing you back on the Gemhawks YouTube channel again very soon. Bye for now.